So welcome to the CANOVI carrot variety trial results and breeding update webinar. We'll get started. I'm happy to be here today to share with you what this season's orange and red carrot trials have showed us, and then to update you on a few of the carrot breeding projects we have going on. I'm Solveig Hansen. I'm the project coordinator for this project. I'm at UBC, University of British Columbia, here in Vancouver, snowy, slushy Vancouver today. So originally, the goal of these trials was to test the CANOVI orange and red populations that we've been developing for some time alongside commercial hybrid and open pollinated cultivars to see how ready they are for commercialization. However, we and most of you found out pretty quickly that we had a germination issue with both populations due to some thrips, a lot of thrips in our greenhouse seed production that resulted in almost no germination on the red population and roughly 30% on the orange population. So our adjusted goal became to compare the commercial cultivars that we were trialing, the hybrids and open pollinated varieties, to see if we can detect any patterns of performance by region or identify any open pollinated varieties that were competitive on some or all farms with the hybrids. There were several components to this year's trial. First were the on-farm trials that many of you participated in. We trialed 5 orange varieties, 6 red. We asked you to plant a 12-foot plot for each variety. About 30 participants evaluated both orange and red carrots using the Seed-linked app, and you submitted ratings on a 1 to 5 scale for traits like germination, vigor, appearance, yield. Roughly a third of you also submitted quantitative data on yield and some notes on maturity and marketability. So that is what you see. Oh, I haven't debuted my pointer. I made my pointer bigger and outlined in orange, so it kind of looks like a carrot. I hope that brings you a little joy. It's bringing me joy. Okay, to supplement that information, we did some replicated trials on the UBC Farm Hub site. We wanted to trial a few more orange cultivars to get an initial look at them. And then we also used 2 harvest dates. We did a 74-day harvest, which is in line with the published maturity dates of most of these varieties. And then a later one, about 3 weeks later, just to get some kind of gauge for how well they held in the field, although it's only on 1 farm, so it's only a suggestion. The orange carrot trial included 5 varieties, so 2 hybrids, which including Bolero, which is the one to beat. Really, since its introduction in 1989, it's been a real workhorse for many, many growers. 2 open pollinated varieties. Touchon Deluxe is a favorite of one of our participatory breeding carrot growers in BC. That seed was both grown and selected in BC by the BC Eco Seed Co-op. And then Dulcinea is a variety selected and the seed grown by Fruition Seeds in Western New York. So 1 OP from each broad region of the country, and then CANOVI orange. I will present the trial results in a few different formats. So directly from Seed-linked, I will share these pie charts showing the percentage of participants who would grow the variety again. I'll also share some photos that some of you have added to Seed-linked and some comments. I encourage you, we'll drop the links to the trial results in the chat. Please go ahead and scroll through them. The gallery for looking at photos is pretty smooth at this point, so it's kind of fun to see what the same variety looked like on a bunch of different farms. I also did statistical analysis on the trial results to help us understand how probable it is that the difference in trial ratings we're seeing is real or due to an actual difference in the varieties rather than just being an artifact of random variability. So I'll walk through some bar charts and heat maps, but in general, the thing to remember is the more bling, the more stars you see, the more sure we are that the difference we're seeing between varieties is due to a real difference. So we'll start with orange carrots, all the types of data we've talked about, and then we'll take a pause for questions before we move on to red carrots and the breeding projects. So this is where carrot trialers were located this year. The carrot trialers are the orange flags So the participants were distributed over all 5 of the Bauta regions, with higher concentrations in BC and Ontario. When I looked for regional differences in the data, I first tried to divide growers by hardiness zones. So basically the length of your frost-free season. I saw a few environmental effects pop up, but very small. And then I thought, well, why don't I just try dividing by east and west? And then I saw a lot of environmental effects show up. So that's the analysis I'm going to share today, because it seemed to get at some more of these differences. Okay, so getting into the data. To orient you, these stars indicate that there's a significant difference among varieties. And then by looking at the heat map, you can see the averages for each variety and each trait. Green is high scores, red are low scores. The heat map helps you see that a lot of these traits travel together, or the productivity traits. So germination, canopy cover, and vigor and yield tended to travel together. In this particular set, the variety rank doesn't change for these traits. So they go in the same order. We'll check out a few more bar plots to see more detail. There are some weak effects for marketability and uniformity. For those quality traits, the difference was between CANOVI orange and several or all of the commercial varieties. So, and there were no significant differences between the commercial varieties. So I won't go into a lot more detail there. We saw no significant difference in appearance or flavor. And I thought that was interesting as somebody who, like many of you, tasted all the carrots and did find differences in flavor, although perhaps more subtle than the 1 through 5 ranking system can pick up. When we look at variation by environment, we see some smaller effects, but for almost every trait except appearance. All of the trait ratings, average trait ratings, are higher in Western Canada, including those with significant differences. We saw the same variety ranking in both regions. So Bolero still came out on top, closely followed by Naval, the other hybrid, and Touchon Deluxe. There's some more nuance here that we'll dig into in the next few slides. So then followed by the 2 commercial OPs, Touchon and Dulcinea, and then good old CANOVI orange that really did its best with the unfortunate seed that was produced last year. Interestingly, I found no genotype by environment variation for any trait. So that means there weren't any cases of a certain variety doing significantly worse or better in one region than the other. That's one of the major things we're looking for in trials like this. We just have to also note that the environmental variable I'm using, east and west, is a very broad brush, right? So there are a lot of ways that environments varied at each of your specific farms that we didn't measure, and that if we did, we might be able to pick up on which environmental characteristics were responsible or associated with these differences in traits. So that's something that we will explore further, hopefully in future trials. To take you briefly through the growing season data style, we'll dig into the difference we first saw in germination. So there's a general pattern over all of these traits that there's less variation among varieties in the east than in the west. You can kind of see this region effect. The mean germination is about 0.5 point lower in the east than the west. Bolero, which is this dark bar that you'll see on all the bar charts, is the highest in both regions. In both regions, these 3 varieties, Dulcinea, Naval, and Touchon, are not significantly different than one another. So they kind of travel as a group. And then poor CANOVI orange was significantly worse for germination, as we talked about. In the mid-season, we looked at canopy cover and vigor. We'll look at canopy cover here. Again, you'll see more spread in the data in the west than the east. In the east, there's no significant difference between any of the commercial cultivars, although numerically the hybrids are slightly higher. In the west, there was no significant difference between Bolero, Naval, and Touchon. And in both regions, CANOVI orange was significantly worse than everything. Just want to note that it makes sense for canopy cover to be highly correlated to germination, right? So if fewer plants come up, their tops will cover the soil less well. Then these traits also carry through to yield, of course, because fewer roots make a lower yield. So there's a similar, you see the pattern emerging in the graphs, right? In both the East and the West, there's no significant difference between any of the commercial varieties, although there are higher mean ratings in the West. And then CANOVI was significantly worse in the West, and worse than all except Dulcinea in the East. So this invites a question: is yield simply a function of germination? And I will posit that certainly germination is foundational to yield. But I know that I observed a difference in canopy cover, in top growth, in vigor, and I think a lot of you did as well, that was independent of germination. So, but in this trial, definitely yield ratings correlated very highly with germination and canopy cover. So the seed link ratings gave us an idea of relative yield, but thanks to those of you who recorded quantitative data, we also have information on actual yield. So you can note a very similar marketable percentage among all of these varieties. And interestingly, Naval, not Bolero, had the highest average marketable yield for these 13 participants. It was interesting to me that in the seedling data, we saw no significant difference in flavor by either variety or region, but a few tasting events fleshed out our understanding of carrot flavor. So at the UBC Farm Fall Fair, we had about 60 people try, I think, 6 varieties of carrots, 3 of which were red, and 3 of which were orange. And all of them were rated almost identically for sweetness and liking. So this, we might interpret that even though we as growers were paying a lot of attention to how this carrot differs in flavor from this next one, everyday consumers are really happy to eat a sweet orange carrot, and they may not be paying attention to the nuance that we are. We also had an opportunity at the University of Toronto to look at genotype by environment interaction at a very rough level for carrot flavor. So I flew out to University of Toronto, Scarborough, with my suitcase half full of carrots. And we tried the same 5 varieties that were grown at UBC and UTSC. In that tasting, Bolero was the most liked from both production sites, but we did detect some genotype by environment interaction, or a suggestion thereof. So Dulcinea was liked better when it was grown at UBC than UTSC. CANOVI Orange was the opposite. It was liked better when it was grown at UTSC than UBC. And also in general, everything was liked better when it was grown in the West. I'm gonna guess, or when it was grown at UBC Farm, I'm gonna guess that's a function of really consistent irrigation and also less extreme temperatures. We just didn't get real high heat this summer here. So now we're going to move into these kind of variety description slides, or I think of them as kind of dossiers, like this is what we have on this variety. You will see English on the left, French on the right, so please orient yourself as is helpful. And then these photos in the middle are from participants. And then we have the pie chart that represents how many growers said they would like to grow that variety again. So Bolero certainly shows up as the one to beat, a serendipitous genetic combination ever since its introduction these many years ago. And except for people who noted slug problems, fertility or edge effect problems in their plots, rodent predation, very positive comments. This is a representative comment from a grower here in BC. I will note that at the UBC farm, Bolero held very well. For its official days to maturity is 75 days, and that's where our first harvest was. But this is how it looked right here at 95 days. So it held very well. Naval was the next in line. You'll see just slightly fewer votes for liking to grow it again. In the East, it was not significantly different than Bolero for any trait. In the West, it was very similar except for germination. Again, highest yield among the folks who recorded supplementary data. And comments were generally positive, especially regarding flavor, noting slimmer roots that were good for bunching, as this comment gets at. Touchon Deluxe, notably, among the two OP varieties in the trial, was better germinating, more vigorous, and higher yielding. And it was not significantly different than Bolero or Naval for any trait in the East, and any trait except vigor in the West. So we do see, real variation in how it does on farms, but where it works, it seems to really work. At UBC Farm, it really shone. It was sweet, crisp, succulent flavor at both early and late harvest dates. And it was the highest yield at our second harvest date. We do see the shape variability that's evident in the photos. So several growers said, this was a really stumpy, short carrot. It tasted great, but this isn't a marketable shape. And for some growers, it really elongated quite nicely. Flavor ratings were also highly variable, ranging from a water nothing flavor noted by a grower in Ontario to others saying it was the sweetest and tastiest in the trial. So it's definitely variable on several of these traits based on conditions. So if it works where you are, it really works. That's wonderful. Dulcinea showed slightly, as we saw in the graphs, slightly lower ratings for some of the productivity traits, but still in the East where it was bred, it was not significantly different than Bolero, Naval, or Touchon for any trait. Lots of folks like these. Some noted germination issues and slower top growth, but eventually good top size. Still a little slower to start, but then catch up and do fine. And Michael Silver in BC noted, kind of quantified that, like, these take one more cultivation because they're a little slower to get going. But a really high quality, good tasting carrot. And then Dear CANOVI Orange, obviously the germination issues that we talked about. So it was rated lower for all the productivity traits, which were an extension of those issues in germination. It did do fairly well in the East for quality traits. We'll leave that there. So lower yield, we certainly saw better quality at our early harvest than our late harvest at UBC. So if I were to put a maturity date on this, I would say roughly 75 days. I would say it really fits in that early harvest rather than something that will hold well late into the season, but that obviously we should test that with a more robust population. And we'll talk in the breeding section about strategies to reconstitute this population and hopefully still make something good out of it, because there's something good here. We've got good tasting carrots, dark orange. There's something to work with. Okay, so at our trials on the UBC farm, we trialed several varieties more than were in the on-farm trials. And a few to draw your attention to are two from our friends at the Organic Seed Alliance. The CIOA is the Carrot Improvement for Organic Agriculture project, which they've been working on for 8 years, selecting open pollinated varieties for organic agriculture. So we wanted to take a look at a couple of these. And in our early harvest, this orange flavor select really stood out. It was absolutely delicious, very high yielding. That would be one that I would love to see get out to more of your farms and see how it did there. Their orange strain cross also has awesome flavor, slightly less productive. A couple others to look at could be some open pollinated varieties from Sativa, which are available through High Mowing Organic Seeds. So Dulciva performs similarly to Bolero in the first harvest. Yes, in the first harvest. And then this Bolin, which is a new one that may be out this season or may be coming, was in the middle of the pack at the early harvest, but doing quite well in our number 3 place in the late harvest. So those are a couple of things to keep on our radar for future carrot trials. So we'll take a pause. I see there's some things in the chat. Yeah, any questions either by voice or in the chat before we roll on to red carrots?
Maybe while people are coming up with their questions, maybe Sylvia, you can help maybe add some more info to this question. John asked if Bolero was developed in or for like what we're calling like the east and west of Canada, and then Rebecca answered that it was developed by a breeder, a French multinational seed company. We're not sure. Just wondering if you had any other info around that.
I mean, it was bred by Vilmorin, by one or several breeders there. It, like many hybrids, is bred to be widely adapted. So it was almost certainly trialed worldwide, or perhaps focused on Europe and the US, so North America. But they want to reach as large an audience as possible and have these varieties be as stable on as many farms as possible. And Bolero really seems to have fit that bill. So it's a widely adapted variety, bred to do well in as many places as possible. Any other questions? I can certainly roll on. These are photos of our carrot selection last year. This is Judith. She's been a worker on a project for, well, since April of last year, and she's gonna get her master's like next week, and she'll move on to bigger and better things, but she's an amazing help. Okay, hearing nothing, oh, I got a hand. Yes, John.
Yeah, could you say how you plan to scout for or get rid of the thrip problem that occurred? There's
so the issue last year was there was an experiment on roses on the bench next to ours that was really acting as a host. The greenhouse folks were using biological materials, tiny insects to attempt to deal with the thrip problem. But it was too little too late and very hard to monitor within the cages, like within the pollination cages where we had flies flying around. So I've talked with her, and this year, we requested that no likely thrip hosts, because we know that thrips like carrots, right? So we need to have nothing else in the greenhouse that will also be a very attractive host. And she agreed. The only other thing in that greenhouse will be poplar trees. And I think that'll take care of a lot of it. She's also going to pre-treat with the biological treatments, from the beginning of the season, not waiting to see a rise in thrip population. Every other year we've done seed production in this greenhouse, it's gone fine. I really think it was the rose issue that gave us problems. But it's definitely on their radar. And I actually, maybe this is a good time to say this. I'll be moving on to a different position. I'll be working at a cover crop breeding lab at Cornell University in Ithaca, starting in January. So we are currently looking for another postdoc to fill this project's shoes. And so that's in progress. So seed production this winter will be in the hands of Chris, who's right here asking a question.
And do you think that the 30% germ that you did have represents some resilience against thrips, or it was just incidental?
That's a great question. I mean, gosh, there was certainly selection for some kind of appeal to thrips. I did hear from our friends at OSA who also had thrip problems in their outdoor cages this summer, that they were seeing much worse effects in the red than the orange populations. So perhaps there's something biochemically going on there. that some compound present in at least some of the orange carrots that's repellent to thrips, but I'm really just hypothesizing. I'll talk more when we talk about carrot breeding. I'll talk about our strategies for bringing back the orange population. Good questions, thank you.